Hey,
Ryan?
welcome to the Culture Marketing Show.
Hey,
We're
Ryan.
back. How are you, Harry?
I'm good. How are you today, man?
Good. Let me do a quick little intro for you, Harry. I just wanted to tell everyone Fridays at 11 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, we love to have this show. It's our culture marketing show. It's our chance to really bring guests on, talk about things that influence the culture marketing of their business. And that could be everything from their recruiting, their hiring, onboarding, training, and even into how they approach their firing and letting go of employees. Really influences company culture inside their organization. So we really want to take this time to dive in and have those deep discussions. And that's kind of what this show is all about. And back in August, I was actually up at a retreat, a CEO retreat, put on by the Arizona Technology Council, and one of their presenters was Harry. And after hearing him speak, I knew I needed to have him on the show. So I was so grateful that he was able to take some time and carve out an hour with us and have a deep discussion, a little bit about hiring assessments, culture assessments, and really the influence of the business that this can have. And we're going to have a little back and forth today because I've heard from a lot of people that say they've got some strong opinions on hiring assessments. Do they work? Maybe they don't work. People love them or hate them. But I think it's a really interesting topic to really dive into and see really what the expert has to say about them and where maybe there's a lot of areas where people aren't even utilizing them correctly. And so they've got an opinion that's kind of a false positive opinion on there. So anyways, Harry, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure, Ryan. Glad to be here.
Good. So give us a little background. Your company is higher capacity, but I'm sure you haven't been there your entire career. So let's get a little
Uh,
backstory.
I have not, as you can tell by the gray in my hair. I've probably been around a little longer than you have. Most of my career was spent in sales and marketing. In fact, for 20 years, I was in the moving and storage industry. I was the the white collar end of a very blue collar industry. I was a sales leader, ran the largest moving and storage sales force in the Arizona market for a United Van Lines agent. Also was with a Mayflower agent for a while, an Allied Van Lines agent at very high levels. And about 5.5 years ago, had an opportunity to move from Arizona to Austin, Texas, and it gave me a chance to reinvent myself. And I reinvented myself in the assessment and selection space, talent management solutions, if you will. So I've been doing this about 5.5 years now, and things are good. Love it, and very passionate about it.
Awesome. Well, give us kind of that elevator pitch on exactly what it is you guys do differently than other companies and kind of what helps drive you as an expert in your space.
Well, first of all, there are a lot of hiring assessments out there. You've probably seen, you can go online and search them. There are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of assessments. The problem is people don't know what they don't know. Everybody knows DISC assessments, for instance, or Myers-Briggs. Those are great instruments for what they're intended to do, but they shouldn't be hiring or selection assessment tools. And people just don't know that they shouldn't be using that. What they should be using is a normative instrument, and a normative instrument differs. There's ipsative instruments and normative instruments. Ipsative, essentially, you're using the candidate as the yardstick to measure themselves against. A normative instrument allows you to use an assessment which has been tested for accuracy. Obviously, it should measure what it's intended to measure, but it allows you to compare two people or three people or whatever to one another. So, for instance, you're a highly assertive person, I'm a highly assertive person. A normative instrument should allow you to determine which one of us is higher in assertiveness than the other. And maybe that's necessary on the job, maybe it's not. But the reality is you need to be using the right instrument for what your intended purpose is. And for hiring and selection, you need to be using a normative instrument. In terms of my assessment, uh, I didn't create this. I merely represent the instrument. But it was created by a gentleman who is among the deans of psychometric assessments in the United States. He's been in the space for over 40 years. uh, literally is kind of the Yoda of assessments, if you will. And that's why I aligned myself with him, because I did my research. I figured out which product was the best. This is a very boutique product. I mean, not everybody uses it. It's not the best known instrument, but I do believe it is the finest instrument that you can use it there.
So perfect. So give us a kind of bold statement here as to why a company would use a hiring assessment as opposed to listening to their gut during an interview. I mean, I think that's what a lot of us do, especially growing companies. We don't know any differently. Maybe that's kind of how we were interviewed for our first few jobs. And so we felt like, hey, let's just bring them in. Let's give them the old 1-2 grill on the types of questions to get as much information from them as possible. Give me a little backstory on why you feel like this is the best approach.
Well, there's statistical and analytical research to show that if you're using your gut only, or a resume in your gut, or a resume and an interview in your gut to make a hiring decision, you may as well flip a coin. If somebody walks in the office, you say call it, and they say heads, and it comes up heads, hire them. Okay. The problem is they're just not going to be accurate and give you information that you can't discern any other way than through assessment. Now, there's different types of assessments, as I shared, but and what I do is behavioral assessment. So how is somebody going to be behaviorally, not only in their real world, but how they're going to adapt those behaviors as they perceive necessary for the job. So it's imperative and by the way, let me back up a minute here. In addition to that, we can create some job modeling. And job modeling is different than a job description. A job description says, maybe you should be able to lift 50 pounds. A job model is an actual thought out document in terms of what behaviors are necessary for success in a given role. So it can create a target for the organization to shoot for. It's the type of thing that if you don't have a target, if you don't know precisely what you're trying to measure and bring aboard, you're going to fail more often than you succeed. So I believe very strongly that behavioral assessment is going to give you an accurate picture of who the candidate is and how they're going to perform on the job.
I think job modeling is really interesting, and I don't think a lot of us do that or even have any experience understanding it. Can you give us an example of what job modeling might look like if,
Sure.
particular companies to hire a customer service or sales representative? What is job modeling, and how would it relate to my recruiting efforts?
Well, job modeling is sitting down and thinking about the true behaviors that are going to be necessary for someone to possess to be successful in the role. So it's not a cognitive assessment type of thing where they add a column of numbers or do a mathematical formula. This is what type how much assertiveness is necessary for a role, how much sociability is necessary for a role, how much attention to detail, and perhaps how much patience or lack thereof is necessary for a role. So, for instance, in our job modeling platform, we have 29 questions, and it's done as a consensus document. It's not just what Ryan thinks or just what Harry thinks. This is done, what Ryan thinks, what Harry thinks, and then we come together as a group, and we create the ideal candidate. So where you may see a role one way, I may see it differently, and this allows us to, put more heads into the mix, if you will.
Yeah.
Create a more clearly defined set of behaviors that are going to be necessary to meet the success. And of course, then using our platform, we're able to take a candidate's behaviors and measure them against the job model behaviors to see if there's a fit. Are they going to have a high likelihood of success, or maybe just a marginal likelihood of success? So it allows the company to truly see how the candidate should perform.
So tell us a little bit about these OMS assessments. Well, actually, let me go back just a second. Oh, I thought it was really interesting. I spent some time on your website getting ready for this show. And you offer actually free job modeling for people. They can go out and fill out a form and they can work and get their first job modeling. Is that
Sure.
correct?
Yes, it's obviously on our website. We offer a number of different, trial items so that people can get a sense of what we're about and how it might benefit them in their work role. So yeah, we can do a free job model. Now, you may be a sales organization and the only thing you really need to hire for regularly is a sales position, and we can job model that. Or
Yeah.
you might have 30 different types of roles within your organization, and each one requires its own job model. I mean, that's
Yeah.
really where you start refining your hiring process. You're not using the same job model for customer service as you are for your CFO.
Yeah. Perfect. I actually, one of my favorite discussions to have with some guests is really about motivation. In fact, I think I have the book up here, Drive by Daniel Pink. There's a handful of TED Talks that are just really intriguing about the power of motivation and what is it really your employees are looking for to become those A players and really commit to themselves. And you're actually saying that we could probably figure out what motivates them before they even start. So we're not left wondering how do we get that motor going 3 months, 6 months into their job, even 3 years into their job. We're talking about what motivates them during the hiring process to kind of see if it conforms to kind of the right processes already in place so that when they come in, we've already got the perpetual motion going. Is that correct? How does that OMS assessment really work?
Well, you're correct to an extent. So everybody has natural behaviors, and those are pretty consistent over the course of someone's lifetime. So, you've always heard of somebody who was a bookworm. Well, they probably have been a bookworm even since they were much younger. But now that you can't call them a bookworm, on the job, they may be lower on the sociability scale. That doesn't mean they're not sociable. That just means they're sociable in a different way. And so each job has its own set of requirements. So yes, if you understand who you're hiring and who's coming in the door from day one, you can coach them, you can motivate them, you can manage them to perform optimally if you know what drives them, so to speak.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think it's important. So these OMS assessments essentially kind of figure out where to plug in those different actions to motivate them.
Yes. So everybody, like I said, has a natural set of behaviors. We measure 7 basic constructs with our assessment: assertiveness, sociability, proactiveness. Think of it as a level of patience. Are you
Yeah.
more proactive or reactive? Discipline. You can think of that as kind of attention to detail. Are they cross the I's, dot the T's kind of person, or are they more, of a generalist, kind of
Yeah.
winging it? We measure behavioral adaptability, how far and for how long somebody can sustain behavioral change outside of who they are. We also measure emotional containment, which is, think of it as emotional intelligence. Are they logic based in their decision making? Are they more touchy feely, emotive, and empathetic on their decision making? And then last, we measure a level of creativity or originality of thought. So we can see a person holistically, who they are, and each job requires a certain degree of each one of these things for peak performance. So we can, like I said, create the job model and then measure the candidate against that job model and see if they're going to be a true fit for the role.
Oh, it's fascinating. It actually reminds me, I spoke recently at a SHRM conference and really talked about the power of soft skills compared to hard skills and how a
Yes.
lot of times as hiring managers, we get so focused in on these hard skills and, really checking those boxes on competency for those hard skills, but we miss out on these 80 plus soft skills that are really going to be more of the success factors of that person in the role than those hard skills. I mean, those hard skills are important to kind of have a bare level minimums, of like, we need to have some level of competency in these. We got to check those, and that's great. But kind of what, to your point, what you're talking about is a lot of those personality traits are really those soft skills that we can measure. And a lot of times we look for assertiveness and we look for motivation based on what they posted recently on social media to try and get an idea of their soft skills, right? But your assessment would take it a level deeper.
That's correct. There's a recent Harvard Business Review article that talks about as artificial intelligence becomes ever increasing in the workplace, the need for these soft skills, these emotional intelligence skills, if you will, are going to be even greater. And yes, I couldn't agree with you more. The soft skills in a job are in life, for that matter. How you get along with people, how you react to people. Are you a super reactive personality, or do you take things in, let it simmer for a little bit, and then respond? Both of those are two different types of personalities, obviously. So,
Yeah.
Being having soft skills in the workplace is going to be ever increasingly important.
Yeah. So, I want to talk a little bit about that, because I think we go through these assessments, and it's all right. We're going to bounce around here just a little bit in our discussion.
Sure.
But I think it's important to understand the power of, during the interview process with candidates, to really pull the truth out of each one of them. And we're trying to identify these traits. So I know, you come from that assessment side of things, but what are some tips or some ideas that some of our recruiters or hiring managers watching this today, they might be able to take away and say, how can I implement a few of these questions, or what to look for in the interview to really identify some of those personality traits?
Well, first of all, interestingly, our assessment gives a set of interviewing questions. And it's not that we're looking for a specific response, but we're looking for a type of response from the candidate. So again, I come from the sales world, so I kind of relate everything back into sales. But let's suppose, for the sake of discussion, you're looking for a salesperson, and you see somebody they've tested as being a salesy type, if you will. And you start interviewing them, and they, for whatever reason, perceive the need to start talking about your company culture and how, I love to get along with everybody. Well, we give some predicted responses. So the salesy type is going to use a lot of I statements as opposed to a lot of we statements. I'd like to meet my targets and objectives. I like to hit my numbers. It's something like that. If they're trying to fake the interview or whatever, they're going to be more about they might say something like, well, I'm all about harmonious relationships in the workplace. That doesn't jive with who they are, behaviorally. So it's an area to probe, it's an area to question, it's an area to do some further due diligence with the candidate. I agree. Behavioral-based interviewing, I'm the big proponent of that. I don't know if you're familiar with Lohman, for instance, but there are behavioral questions. Tell me about a time where you had a situation where suddenly your PowerPoint went down and you had to start talking out spontaneously.
Sure.
And so that gives the interviewer some idea as to how the candidate behaves, if you will. So OMS and my assessment allows you to see how they should predict their response. It's not going to be word for word, it's not going to be identical, but it should be something like that. And if it isn't, it's an area to probe.
That's really interesting. So we talked a little bit about kind of their answers, kind of might indicate cultural, how they might impact into the company culture, the behavior of the organization. What are some things that you look for to kind of see if they're going to be a natural plug-in to maybe how my culture exists, or how I want my culture to exist in the future? Is there some types of, maybe some zingers, some questions in there that you can help give us some insight on?
I don't have any zinger questions. today with things like Glassdoor, I mean, I did some research in advance of our program today, and candidates go and they do research on you just as you're doing research on them
Yeah.
as an organization. I mean, I took a look at the top 50 places in the United States to work. And, everybody thinks, well, it's Apple, it's Facebook, it's Google, it's all these tech companies. There's a lot of companies out there like Johnson and Johnson and Delta Airlines. And interestingly enough, there's a huge grocery chain here in Texas called HEB. These are all employers of choice. These are in the top 50 from Glassdoor in the United States. And almost without fail, it shows that the candidates that have gone to work there, their employees, they feel that they have a chance to um, move ahead. They feel like they are treated as human beings. Their managers don't talk down to them or don't just tell them what to do. There's a reason behind what they do, and it's explained to them in a very full way, so that in specific this HEB grocery chain, one of the things, and I'll read it to you, everyone understands how their role fits in with what the company does. That's imperative for an organization to instill in their people, right?
Yeah.
You want to work at a place where you understand you're not just a little cog in a wheel, you're an important cog in the wheel. And your role, whether you're a bagger or a stalker or the you know CEO, it's important to the organization, and they allow you to understand how you're making a contribution. And I think that's very important in any organization. So I don't have any
Uh,
Zinger questions for you,
yeah.
but I think the candidates out there are looking at companies just as hard as the companies are looking at the candidates these days.
That's a great perspective, and you think about how great Disney is at treating their employees not as employees but as cast members.
Right.
And so, to your point, it's not just here's a job, it's more of here's a role. Here's why I'm important to the intricacies, even though I might be sweeping the streets for popcorn from earlier in the day. It's because my role is important to the beautification of Disneyland or the parks, which have a long term approach to how great our experience is as a company. And I think that's really interesting, the dialogue, and maybe that's a really good way to frame it out in the interview. Um, is you're kind of pushing on them to talk about, we take this seriously because you have an important role with us. And I think in return, that candidate's going to lean in a little bit more and take a little bit more seriously about the importance of getting done, even those little things inside the organization.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think there's a lot to be said for that. It's interesting. Again, going back to Glassdoor, I saw it over and over again with these top 50 employers. Everybody that in those organizations feels like they have a chance to grow and to move up and to become better. And so again, that's something that companies today need to do a better job of, is allowing people that opportunity to flourish. Sadly, for too long, I don't know if you're familiar with the Peter Principle. The Peter Principle basically says that people rise to their level of incompetence. And it doesn't mean they're incompetent. It just means that an organization says, wow, Ryan's a great salesperson, so we're going to make him the sales manager. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that Ryan, as a great salesperson, is going to be a great sales manager. So many times they promote people from within in a role,
Right.
and they flounder. And so that's what it means, the Peter Principle, rising to their level of incompetence. They just, it's not that they want to fail, they just don't know how to do it. And so, these great organizations figure a way to allow people to rise to their level of competence, not incompetence. And so, keeping someone, in a role may be to their benefit. It may not be necessarily great for them to be moving up in terms of position or status, but it may allow them to continue to be employed at this organization, which is something that, may be very necessary in their world.
So I know we talk a lot about hiring assessments, bringing somebody in to the position, but I think you say something really interesting. Um, it might not be the best to advance them to a certain position because it's outside their true competence level, but just because, like you said, they're a good salesman doesn't mean they're going to be a great leader or a great manager. Do you
Right.
recommend having that person take the assessment another time or a third time before any sort of advancement? Because I know we talk a lot about it, and I talk to recruiters a lot, and our software integrates with hiring assessments, but we don't necessarily talk about that assessment once they're already employed before they get accepted to a promotion.
I think it's imperative that companies assess their people periodically to see, number one, are they capable of moving into a different role? So, for instance, from salesperson to sales manager, yes, that's something to check for. But also, how are they perceiving the need to be in the role? Right? Are they happy? Are they being managed appropriately? There's ways to tell this with the right assessment tools.
Yeah.
So, if an employee has suddenly gone from being a top performer to being, a marginal employee or performer, what's going on? Why is that occurring? Has there been some kind of change in management? Because their perception is their reality, right? How they perceive the need to be on the job, it changes from day to day, from manager to manager, job to job. So, yeah, it's important, I believe, to periodically assess people, especially if they're going to be, you're looking at promoting an internal candidate. And furthermore, best-in-class assessment tools will allow you to go into your database and say, okay, these are the top 10 people in our organization currently that we need to be talking about for our new manager of customer service or whatever the role is. There should be a way to pull out that information so you're not wasting your time talking to 75 people in your organization. You're talking to the top 5 or 10 or whatever it is to narrow down your decision.
Yeah. So, Harry, I want to change gears just a little bit and to bring up kind of, I think one of the biggest things that assessments get hit on is the lack of diversity that it allows into the organization. So let me just start off by saying there's a company. We're based here out of Phoenix, Arizona. A technology company here in town that continually was recognized as one of the best places to work year in, year out for quite a while. And then they started looking, I think, in the rearview mirror and realizing that a lot of the people on their bus, on their team, are all replicate. They all look like the leadership team, and it's because in their hiring process they said, these 10 people were very successful for us, so let's go get 10 more exactly like those 10. And then before you know it, year after year after year of doing that process, you kind of look into the organization and it's a cookie cutter organization. They're all the exact same. And now they went from being one of the best places to work to they're getting a lot of backlash because of the lack of diversity inside the organization. Yet I think it's really important to have a diverse workforce to give the insights of the company different perspectives, adapts to different audiences and different types. Tell us a little bit about how hiring assessments, maybe historically, maybe there have been problems with hiring assessments, or maybe we're just interpreting them incorrectly. But how can hiring assessments even help us be conscious of diversifying our employment?
Well, first of all, Ryan, I would say to you that I would not want a bunch of Stepford employees. I don't think we want everybody to be the same. I don't want all men or all women or all whatever. That's not good for any culture. The more diversity you have, obviously, the better the culture is going to be, right? It's that melting pot. That said, I think you have to balance it versus performance, right? So I'm not saying, and I would never tell you to hire people strictly on a behavioral assessment. I think it's a data point among multiple data points that you're using, and that is, who they are on their resume, who they are in their education, who they are in their community involvement. I think there's a much bigger picture that you need to look at as an employer than simply who they are behaviorally. Now, that said, certain behaviors are going to be requisite on any particular job. But the degree, we can have somebody that's a super high assertive or somebody that's marginally high assertive that are going to both perform really well in a job. So it, it, you can, there's a spread, okay? There's a spread of people. And I would never encourage an organization to hire cookie cutter people. It's just not good for the company. It's not good for the culture. But that said, they need to balance it with performance, right? Every company, unless you're a nonprofit, and even if you're a nonprofit, you're there to put money towards your cause. So you've got to balance it versus the needs of the business and profits, etc. But I agree with you. Diversity is important. I think you can certainly use an assessment tool to find people that are going to fit within a company, but not everybody will be identical.
Yeah. So inside a company like that, how can assessments really impact the attrition of an organization? If we find that we're bleeding great talent, we thought we did the right thing. We thought we were doing the right assessments. We were looking for soft skills as well as hard skills in the interview and through the process. But yet we're finding ourselves with continual lack of employees sticking around. What are some things that maybe you've seen some good organizations do, or just in your experience, maybe assessments can be read differently to help with that?
Well, I don't know that the assessment itself is going to be read differently. What I think best-in-class assessments are going to do, they're going to allow you to create reports that, so for instance, let's back up for just a minute. Everybody needs to be spoken to in the language they speak, okay? So supportive types of personalities, the people that are all about the team, the people that are all about the we, need to hear things differently than a driver who, the founder of a company needs to hear things, right? That founder you can probably tell them some things very point blank. The supportive personality needs to hear it, in a softer way. And so what I think happens is companies treat everybody the same, and that's a problem because not everybody's not the same. You and I are different.
Great point.
And so, to talk to Ryan the way he needs to hear it, it may be very differently than talking to Harry the way he needs to hear it. So, best-in-class assessments allow reports to be generated that would allow a manager or show a manager how to, talk to you. So I'm an analytical type, right? I'm an accounting geek or whatever. And I shouldn't say geek. That's probably not nice. But I'm an accounting guy, and and I've got a salesperson that I manage. Okay, those are totally different. How do I start becoming more expressive to talk to that expressive person the way they need to hear it? So, best-in-class assessments will give you reports on how to do that. It's not rocket science, but it's imperative. And to your point of turnover is huge, and it's one of those. It's an expense to an organization that is in some ways very difficult to quantify. Right? Everybody knows that people leave, but what does it really cost? And I was recently talking to an HR leader here in Austin, and she was telling me the old metric of 1 to 2.5 times the annual salary of someone. If they leave, it costs you 1 to 2.5 times their salary to replace them. She says that's now 1.5 to 3 times. And interestingly enough, the more senior or more specialized the role, the more it's going to be. So if you get a senior director of marketing, and she leaves your company and was making $100,000, that might cost you upwards of $300,000-$400,000 to replace that candidate. And that's, there's a lot of factors that go into that replacement cost. But think about balance that versus, if we would have assessed that person up front and, seen who they were or had been able to manage them better using our assessment tools, that, maybe we wouldn't have had that turnover. Maybe we wouldn't have hired them in the first place. That ultimately led to that turnover. So um,
So that's
there
some.
are there are ways to use an assessment to keep those turnover costs down.
So that's interesting. We all know that I think it's 80+% of the reason people leave their current job is because of their direct line supervisor.
Absolutely.
And so, just by talking through with you, I hadn't really thought this before now, but maybe it's imperative to be teaching that frontline management the importance of understanding these assessments and who's on their team and exactly how they should be treated. And that really needs to be that training brought to that frontline management of it's not just about managing for performance and, Joe hit it and Mary missed it, kind of a thing. But it's understanding the ticking clock of each one of them and how they keep their time going forward inside the organization, as opposed to, again, just appointing a really good salesman to be their manager, and then he doesn't know how to manage, but he's a really good salesman.
Right. That's
So
a double whammy to the company, right? The
yeah,
sales guy that was a high performer now isn't performing that task and is, having difficulty in the management role as well. So
yeah,
you're getting hit twice. I couldn't agree with you more. And not only when you invest time in making people better, that goes towards the cultural feeling within the organization, right? That's the
yeah,
growth. So if you're, it's a double win, right? Now, not only are you making people so they can perform better, but you're making those frontline managers feel even better that now they have some type of way to empower them.
mm-hmm.
They've learned a new skill, they've learned some new techniques to allow them to grow in their role. So it's a double win.
Yeah. And I was having a conversation with a CEO of a company, and they're getting ready to do an IPO. Just massive growth, and I've been so impressed by them. I'm sitting down, I'm talking with the CEO and founder, and I'm talking about his role as the CEO. And I'm like, God, that is a lot. You're worrying about the direction of the company. You're out there trying to find the investors. You're trying to keep all the shareholders happy. You know what's the number one thing that you do every day? And he said, my number one job when I wake up in the morning and before I go to bed at night is how do I make the people in my organization the best versions of themselves? And that spoke volumes to me because, to your point, is if that manager is doing a good job at making their team be the best version of themselves, not be the best version on the spreadsheet, I think naturally the spreadsheet will get better. Am I correct?
Absolutely. It's those soft skills, Ryan. This is
Yeah.
exactly what you alluded to earlier. When you found a company, you're making widgets in the garage, all you care about is making the next widget. I got to make widgets until I have a million widgets in my garage and I can sell them for X profit. But then the organization starts organically growing, right? Now we have salespeople. Now we have different levels of management. Now we have customer service people. And your focus goes from not making widgets anymore, because that's being made by somebody else, to running an organization. And you come to the realization pretty quick that it's people that run your organization, not necessarily anything else. So now, how do I make those people better? How do I make them the best they can be so our company can be the best it can be? And so you're absolutely right. There's a metamorphosis that
Yeah,
many
absolutely.
leaders go through.
So two things I want to touch on before we end here. The first one is about buy-in. I hear this time and again with our audience with HR leadership is their budgets went from this to this to this. And it just feels like the HR budget's never getting bigger. It's
Right.
just trying to do more with the same or do the same with less, right? But if they need to take this to their leadership and they need to say, hey, listen, we need to invest into assessments because I think it's important. And like you said, as we've had that discussion, it's not only in the hiring process, but in the process of getting them as a regular assessment to understand them as a person. But then it's also interesting to talk about, reevaluating the entire hiring structure to be able to interpret those soft skills. So if they want to take the time to show their executive teams on why they should add this to their next year's budget for assessments, where do they start? How do they quantify an ROI on this?
Well, first of all, I have probably the best I've ever seen turnover calculator. I didn't develop it. It was developed by the gentleman that developed our assessment, or somebody developed it for him. I don't know, but it takes a lot of different things into consideration. You've got to make a business case for it, right? It's got to make sense in the organization. It's got to have some return on investment. So if you spend $10,000, what is that return going to be? Is it going to be $100,000? Is it going to be $1 million? Is it going to be we lose money on it? We never use it. So the point is, a business case has to be made for an assessment. I have to tell you that assessments in the whole can be an absolutely cheap buy. Okay, in terms of, and I'm talking about even great assessments. And by the cheap buy, I don't mean they're inexpensive. I mean they are going to return a big number compared to their hard cost. So, best in class organizations understand that they've got to spend a little money sometimes to improve the organization. And this is improving the people, right? You can buy all the new machinery you want. You can buy all the new office furniture and cell phones you want.
Right.
But that doesn't necessarily improve the organization exponentially. Your people are having the best people, having them happy, having them motivated, having them engaged. That is what's going to really be, a 10x, 20x, 30x return on the investment. And so, I don't want to get into pricing of assessments here. If anybody wants to follow up with me, at some point, or sees this podcast later and wants to reach out, I'd be happy to share it with them then. But it's a minimal investment compared to the return, I can assure you.
How do they measure that ROI? I mean, if somebody's debating on implementing assessments, what are some of those metrics they need to look at right now so that when they implement the assessments over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, they can come back to it and report against it? What are they looking at?
Well, again, I think they're looking at turnover, right? How much is that truly costing them? But that's tough to quantify, but it's in their P&L somewhere.
Yeah.
They're looking at growth, right? If I have 10 people and I'm growing at a rate of 100%, I need another 10 people this year. So you need to make sure you're onboarding the right people. So how do you decide between Mary and Jerry? Well, there's only one real way to do that, and that's to assess them to see which one is going to be a better fit in terms of behavior, in terms of cultural fit, in terms of manageability. I mean, there's a lot of and working with the people that are already here, again, kind of cultural. But it's a, how do I say it? You can't. I'm trying to get a good analogy, and I'm not having success getting one here right now. But it's very important to make sure that you're using, and by the way, whether you're using my assessment or any assessment, make sure you're using the right assessment. You don't want to be spending money unnecessarily by investing in the wrong tool for your needs. So they're relatively inexpensive compared to their overall return, Ryan. So that's what I would say.
Cool. Harry, tell the people how they can get in touch with you if they like what they hear.
There's several ways. I actually have a working phone. You can call me. I'm in Austin, Texas, 512-240-2750. You can go to my website, which is www.hirecapacity, that's HIRE capacity.com. You can look on my website. You can check out our various tools that we have to sample and try. And of course, if it's something they'd like to explore in a more meaningful way, I'm always happy to talk with people. I'm very passionate about this. And I think the way to improve organizations is by getting the right people on their bus, as you mentioned earlier. And the right people can really be found through a great assessment tool.
Harry, you've been a delight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll put all your contact information in the show notes and get that shared out. So Thanks so much. And again, tune in next week, every Friday at 11 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. We have another edition of the Culture Marketing Show. Thanks so much, Harry.
Thanks, Ron.
Bye-bye.
Bye.